Hi friends. Today I thought we'd spend some time talking about figures in the SandTray. I'm a huge fan of SandTray work. There are about 4 different models associated with the type of SandTray therapist that your clinician might be or that you might be interested in working with, or if you're a clinician, what you have personally studied. There are more formal ones, and I practice a more informal, probably humanistic is between humanistic and psychodynamic is probably where I would place, and maybe narrative is where I would place my own personal use of the SandTray. But there's also Jungian, there's archetypal type of things that go on, and there's sand play versus SandTray, and I don't have knowledge about what those things mean because those aren't the models that I was trained in. So what I'm talking about today is going to be based the model that I use and have been trained in. So lots of SandTray content here in our community, mostly because I'm a fan of it and it's one of my favorite ways for my own work, but also as a clinician, I've used SandTray with lots and lots of people, either as the main source of therapy or just to kind of like illustrate a point, after several sessions and we want to kind of capture it all visually. It's a nice way to do the model. So here on my left, this box right here is one of my favorite SandTrays, and I've got a whole stack of them. And anyway, one of the main things that we need to understand about the SandTray, at least in the models that I practice in, is that the figures that are used, so there are figures. I'm going to be working with a couple of them to show that, so they might look like toys to you, and they are toys. This is Groot, if you are familiar with Groot. I love Groot. So they are toys. Sure, this is a toy, right? And so I'll show some of these. I probably have thousands of figures. And there are definitely themes that we use as clinicians to kind of understand certain things, like bridges and pathways and burying things can lend themselves to interpretation, but not always. So it's not a hard and fast. So what I want to talk about today is a way that when you look at the way that we process work on this channel, the way that you experience the figures is going to be entirely different than the way that I experience the figure. So when I'm creating a SandTray for you and demonstrating things, I'm definitely coming from a position of how I'm experiencing that figure in that moment. So I wanted to I talk about that at the top of, I think, just about all of my SandTray videos, but I want to make sure that I spend some time kind of going over it in depth. So the idea here with figures in the SandTray is that when we're placing them into the tray, there is something going on with that process. So that could be organizing. So as in organizing your thoughts. And one way you might think about that, if you've read Harry Potter at all, and the practice of pulling the thoughts out and putting them into a bowl to be able to look at it, that is kind of like an organizing process. It's also a way of projecting. So I might project onto a figure an emotion that I'm trying to work with, or some thoughts or feelings that I'm trying to sort. It can be an explainer. So if you're having a hard time kind of like explaining a concept, you might say, well, it's kind of like Eeyore, for example, or it's kind of like, just like a tree whose leaves have fallen off of it. It's a way of explaining something that language fails to explain. It can be about understanding, and that could be like a conveyance of, I want you to understand me better, but it also is about your own understanding. And then there's a heavy emphasis on narrative, and for clinicians who practice narrative therapy, SandTray is a really nice tool to go along with that. And the idea with sort of the narrative styles, the sort of postmodern therapeutic orientation includes narrative therapy, and the idea here is that we're taking a concept and placing it outside so that we can get a fresh look at it. So anyway, I thought I would go through a couple of figures and give you an example of how I would want anybody to think about a figure in SandTray. So let's say you were working with SandTray, and this figure of Groot, I am Groot, this figure of Groot appealed to you. What I would want is in what way does it appeal to you? Okay, and that can be vastly different, even from your own tray to tray, but also kind of how you experience a figure. So Groot might be playful. Groot might be like sturdy and steadfast. Groot might be a sad story to you, like any number of things. So whenever I'm working with a figure and I'm going to demonstrate a SandTray item, I do try to pause and say, like, before I show you how I'm using this, consider how you might use this. So there's an example. Here's another example, which is these little I got these from a Dungeons and Dragons collector. I have like 6 of these, and I have some ice walls, and I don't know Dungeons and Dragons at all, and I don't know why they have figures, but I needed fire, and all I had was a campfire, and I wanted to do other things with fire. So thinking about just this figure of fire, I can imagine using this in a SandTray to represent danger, like an actual fire. If I was processing a trauma related to fire, I might put fire kind of in relationship to another figure, like an overwhelming, build it up all around them to demonstrate like an overwhelming and scary fire. I could put like a bird next to it and eggs and consider it like Phoenix Rising. It could be a division of the past versus the future, like I lit that on fire and I've moved on. It could be a block, in front of you, an impediment in that way. So lots of ways that we might consider just the element of fire, or even if you were like a feng shui practitioner and you're working with like the different elements, all kinds of things. Here's another figure that I think it can be about time, like time is passing. It can also be about old versus new. You tell me, what else would you do with this kind of antique? You might put this next to like a grandfather figure in your tray, like an old-timey thing. Or I definitely have used it just as a representation of time, because I don't have another time measure. I don't have another clock. This is the only clock I've got. And so like if I'm working with an issue of time, I would put that in the tray. Here's another example of like, how much could you project onto this? So horses get used a lot in the SandTray. Animals overall get used a lot. Horses get used tons. And so I have a large variety. This one's interesting because I've had this used as, just a member of a collection of horses. But I've also had this set aside as sort of like an artistic, like, because it's got this pretty kind of, I don't know if you can tell, but there's some shimmer to that horse. And it's definitely got a very fancy hairstyle and a necklace on. I guess that's a necklace. So creativity, standing out, like it definitely stands out if you have it in with, 5 brown horses and then you've got this horse. It's going to be a standout. So think about ways that we might explore ways that we stand out. I have this little collection. It's actually a series of 3. And you can see it's got rainbow wings. You can see it's a young little dragon. It's a baby dragon essentially. So already right off the bat, right? Like I love dragons. Dragons get used a ton in the SandTray to represent all kinds of different things, either scary things or magical things or wishing things or fantastical things. This dragon could be used for how young it is, right? So we might project onto that cuteness and like vulnerability. We could also talk about the rainbow and things like pride and LGBTQI representation, and then the series of 3. Well, I only have 2 with me right here. You see this one is covering his mouth, and this one is covering its eyes. and then I have a third one that is covering its ears. And so, you know, as a way of like saying what we don't see and what we don't hear and what we don't say. Here's another one. It's a little bit grubby because it's coming right out of my blue SandTray. This one I use a lot. Don't mind her blue sand. That's not supposed to be there. It's coming out of my blue SandTray right now. I use so look at that and think about for yourself, what does that represent, right? So it's a sort of feminine looking character with a sword, but the sword is down. And then she's they are in a particular posture, right? So for you, how does that organize a thought or a feeling? How does that explain how you're you know, dealing with an issue? What kind of narrative would you project onto that figure? And then just outright projection. What if you were looking at the SandTray items and trying to pick something and you picked this down off the shelf and you were going to put it into your SandTray, what would that represent for you? For me, I use her a lot. I call her because to me she's a female character, and I use her a lot to kind of, when I do work on like my badassery. Like I like that there's strength. She's a badass. She's wearing this black costume. Like she's dramatic looking. I'm not a very dramatic looking person, so I can use a narrative element or a projection of that kind of an experience if I'm working in the SandTray. And I'll probably in another video show you some of the videos where I've used this figure in particular to talk about my own experience. And then I kind of like that quiet strength. Like I could wield this sword against you, but right now we're talking. Like we're all right. So I don't know. It's a conveyance for me of like a quiet strength in a really kind of dramatic look at me kind of way. And so I will explore that theme with that figure. So all of those examples to say, you know, whenever you experience SandTray, either as a clinician or as a client, thinking about how you experience a figure, it's really important to understand that that is just your own experiencing of it, that everybody has their own experience of what a figure might be, and every tray has its own experience of what it's trying to convey in that particular scene. So I just thought we would spend a little bit of time making sure we all understand that point. I hope you're doing well, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks.